So I'm working on this XCOM-inspired game, and I wanted to have a fog of war to it. It's a game that's very horror-themed, so I wanted the visibility and the capability to see the enemies in your environment to be something that you couldn't always depend on. And the fog of war, it was important to me to have two different stages. It has currently visible things anywhere that you can currently see, it's just rendered normally, and then things that you have seen before, but currently cannot see, are rendered very dark. So if I were to fly over here, you can see I went up here before so I can see this part of the level, but I have no idea what's over here in this region. And obviously in the area that I'm in, I can see pretty well. And not only did I want to have this sort of two-level system, but I wanted enemies to only be visible when they were in current visibility. So while I can still see the parts of the level that I've explored, as soon as an enemy is no longer visible, like actively visible, they will be completely gone. And you can see this, I can demonstrate it if I take control over this, and if I move my player back and forth from here to here, you can see this enemy totally vanishes when I'm over here, that enemy totally vanishes when I'm over here, but the environment, since I've explored that area, does not go away. And obviously I have some what I think are cool effects here in terms of how it's all rendered and everything. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about how the technology that drives this system works. So the first step was to bake the visibility data into a texture. I want this to be a graphical effect, which means I need to somehow get the data into the GPU. And the easiest way to do that is with the texture, especially in a game like this where conceptually it's 2D, even though the graphics are 3D. So I can do a sort of top-down map of what the current visibility looks like. I can just do that process backwards to then map the world position of whatever pixel I'm rendering onto the texture and see how visible it should be. So this was pretty easy. Once I got this set up with a shader and everything, I was running it in a test scene, and then the next step was to bake all of the lifetime visibility data into a separate channel. So I'm using the green channel to store any area that you've ever seen before, and the red channel to store anything that you can currently see. So for enemies, I can sample the red channel and only render them if they're currently visible. For the environment, I can sample the green channel and render it if it is ever been visible. And now the last step was to set this up so that the environment would render differently depending on if you could currently see it or if it was historical data. Because it's important that the user know for sure if there's no enemy in a space or if there could be an enemy in a space but they just can't currently see it. So there had to be a clear distinction there. So initially, the easiest way to do this was just to make things that you couldn't see sort of grayscale, black and white, and then anything you could see just rendered normally. But I knew I wanted this effect to look a little bit more interesting. It was like, the graphics are kind of semi-realistic, and the effect was way too old school. It was really blocking up the environment into this weird, unnatural way. So initially, I set up the texture that I baked the environment data onto as a point-sampled texture. That means it has really sharp edges, because I wanted those clear definition between the tiles. But I wasn't really liking how that was looking, so I changed it to have some filtering on it, which basically just blurs the edges. It's an effect designed to make low-res textures look a little bit better and less sharp and aliased. But I'm using it here to just kind of blur the edges of my texture. It's basically a free effect. It has almost no performance implications. And then in addition, I multiply on a noise texture, which adds this sort of cool destroyed effect around the edges. And the result is something that really, really fits the vibe of my game. I think it's super cool looking. It's very clear what you can see and what you used to be able to see and what's going on. And it has this really, really spooky vibe. And so I wanted this to be really easy to modify so that I could tweak it until it was really perfect. So I can even do live updates on this whole setup. The minimum brightness affects a lighting effect that I have going on here, where the closer a tile is to you, the more lit it is. If I set that to 1, the minimum brightness is max brightness, and basically brightness is not affected at all by this effect. If I set it to 0, then the dark areas are just black. I can set this to 0.5, so it's a little bit easier to see. Destruction start determines how far from the edge the destruction effect begins. The destruction end determines how far from the edge the completely void effect begins. So I can set that really high, more things start to disappear. And this sample distance is just something that I use to help the walls render better. Since they're not technically on the grid, but they have to sample outward a little bit in order to get good data. And the last cool thing I wanted to mention about this effect is that obviously the lighting and the assets and everything and the values here are ways that I can change how this effect looks. But since things that you can't see are just not rendered at all, what I put in the background has a huge impact on how the game looks and feels. So if I were to change the skybox, it applies a totally different feel. And I can even, instead of having a skybox back there, since it is just the background, if I change the background of my camera from skybox to solid color, now I can have like a totally black background, which was what I had initially. I thought it looked pretty cool. Or, I could have like a crazy color, like I could have this red background and then maybe do some post-processing so it like glows intensely, or just like sort of like a faint dark purple or something. And this could be different per level. So like maybe, you're in one level where you're like in this dream sequence haunted house and you have the starscape behind you. Another level is just like pure pitch black to like really feel oppressive. And I don't know, I'm really happy with it. This came together a lot easier than I expected, thanks to a lot of the work that I did, just making the tile system and everything verbose and have lots of really helpful functions. Going into it, I really wasn't sure how I would do it and if it was going to work the way I wanted it to, and it's one of those things where it just came out so much better than I expected. Honestly, probably better than I deserve. Half of this stuff I just did randomly, wondering what would happen, and it just ended up working out.